Hi everyone, this is the Grand Duke Dmitri Diary Series, excuse me, with Dr. William Lee. That's me, and we are doing 1939 today. I should say the Grand Duke Dmitri video series, because although we're primarily, or at least we have primarily been doing diary entries, we're using some other materials as well as today when we return to the long Constantine Grunwald Letter of 3rd June 1939. So our recap. Well, for 1915, it was a pretty uneventful day. Lunch with the parish priest there in Usovo, reading the book by or about Grand Duke Sergei, and just some anxiety about the fact that nothing had been received yet, no letter had been received yet from the ballerina Alexandra Balashova. And 1939, the day before last, that video, we had Grunwald talking about Vladimir in England. Apparently, Vladimir was at that time working in a factory in what Grunwald calls a provincial town in England, and talking about the pluses and minuses of that. Today, we have a glittering cast. We have Lord Beaverbrook, Winston Churchill, the, I quote, Lords of the Admiralty. There was only one Lord of the Admiralty, but there were, of course, other people, other important people looking after naval affairs in Great Britain. And then we have our old friend Maisky, the Soviet ambassador to the UK, who was there in London. And today we are putting Grand Duke, well, listen to me, Prince Vladimir on hold and going right back into the life of our friend Dmitri and what's up with him and what Grunwald considers it essential for Maria to know about her brother's activities. Okay, so here we go. I return to Grand Duke Dmitri. During his long sojourn in the South, he seems to have been treated as a major political star and entered into relations with diverse English personalities like Lord Beaverbrook, the great press magnate, who is his latest infatuation. They see each other regularly and have long political conversations. The Grand Duke meets various eminent persons at Beaverbrook's house, such as Winston Churchill, the Lords of the Admiralty, and who knows who all. That flatters him and seems to give him the impression that he's playing an important role. He's even lost all interest in the political actors of the Russian emigration, who are obviously small beer compared to these British statesmen. I'm just going to make a note, sorry. Okay, who are small beer compared to these British statesmen. The question is, what are Lord Beaverbrook's own views? He is, as you probably know, madam, a man of the Hearst type, extremely rich, one of the biggest fortunes in England, extremely powerful, but without any scruples whatsoever. The Grand Duke talked to me about him so much during his last visit to Paris that it made me worry, especially when I learned that there was talk of possible meetings with Maisky, the need to return to Moscow one day soon, and other projects of the same order. To be sure of what was going on, I wanted to meet Lord Beaverbrook myself, as the Grand Duke, for his part, had suggested. Okay, I guess there's no need to doubt Grunwald when he says that Dmitri himself had suggested that Grunwald meet Lord Beaverbrook, but as usual, Grunwald is being quite patronizing toward Dmitri, and he and Maria, between the two of them, seem to think that they need to sort of channel Dmitri into the right direction. And in another letter from Grunwald, there's even clearer example of this, where he writes to Maria, well, thank God Dmitri is now in a sanatorium where he will be looked after and not sort of left to his own devices. Anyway, here we go. A major political star. Well, that, my friends, was what Dmitri had always wanted, always. Even when he was a very young man, that was what he had wanted. And now, apparently, only, not even 3 years before his death, he's getting a taste of that, whether it's really consequential or not. So good. His latest infatuation, according to Beaverbrook. So this time, his latest infatuation is not a woman. It has nothing to do with sex. But this grand political figure, Lord Beaverbrook Max Aitken, that's spelled Aitken. He was Canadian. He was a self-made man. He one of 10 children, the son of a pastor in Canada, and he'd worked his way up, starting out as a paper boy, basically. I mean, it was a real, if not rags to riches, because I don't think he was in poverty, but, a real meteoric rise. I don't know why we say that, because meteors come down, don't they? Anyway, he turned out to be a press baron in Britain. He owned the Daily Express, and when he bought it, it was small beer, as Grunwald would say, but it ended up having, I think, the largest circulation of possibly any paper in the world. It had over 3 million subscribers or readers. I'm not sure quite how they tabulate that. So maybe I shouldn't say any paper in the world, but it was a biggie. It was very big. So that, Grunwald points out William Randolph Hearst, and we all know about him, San Simeon in California, and Orson Welles' famous movie Citizen Kane. But if we were to make the comparison nowadays, the person who springs to mind is Rupert Murdoch. And yeah, again, quite an equivocal figure. And I think Lord Beaverbrook's ideas were less harmful than Murdoch's, and he was more open-minded and more allowed other people to speak their piece. But yeah, it's an apt comparison. So what were his views, as Grunwald asked the question? Well, he was anti-war. He was not an isolationist per se, because everything for Beaverbrook was about the British Empire and the Commonwealth, and anything that helped the British Empire and the Commonwealth, he was all for, including expanding it, and anything that was irrelevant to the British Empire and the Commonwealth, he didn't want the country to get involved in any way. So he was anti-war. He was more or less indifferent to England, more engaged with Europe, more engaged with the Commonwealth. And yeah, he was anti-war. He wasn't pro-German, he was anti-war. And but he would see when Britain faced this truly existential crisis, he would then, of course, dive in. He was a great friend of Winston Churchill's. From what I read, they had a couple of almost friendship-ending fights, but they always made it up. And Churchill asked him to be, in 1940, asked him to become the Minister of Aircraft Production. So that was a wartime ministry, obviously. And he accepted, and then he was all in. But at this time, when he was such an influence, apparently, on Dmitri, he was anti-war. He was definitely a social climber. You might ask yourself why he was bothering with Dmitri, who, after all, had no political reach. But he certainly wanted to be in with the aristocratic set, and in this instance, even with the royal set. as so many people of his kind do and have in the past. So it made sense in that respect that he would value Dmitri's presence as one of his sort of hangers-on. And yeah, Dmitri wasn't stupid. We've talked about that. He was a smart man. He was well informed. And he would have had something to say, and he would have said it. He wouldn't have just been a yes man. And given what we know, for instance, about Beaverbrook's relationship with Winston Churchill, he wasn't necessarily looking for yes men, at least not in every instance. So, there were legitimate reasons for Dmitri to be included in Beaverbrook's circle of friends. Did he truly have no scruples? Well, I don't know that I would say that. I mean, mind you, I'm not an expert. I searched years ago for a biography of him, and all I found was a little tiny one that was, sort of in a series about Canadian superstars, so to speak. And I think the current Wikipedia entry is almost longer, certainly more informative than that little book. But I should look again, because I definitely would read biography of Beaverbrook, of Aitken. Did he really have no scruples? Well, as I was about to say, we all have much experience nowadays, especially in the U.S., of these billionaires of the type of Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and Donald Trump, who just look at the world as a plaything. I think Beaverbrook was more intelligent and seems like more responsible than at least some of the people I just mentioned. But, it's hard for these men with their huge egos and their huge influence and the ability to buy anything they want. It's hard for them, apparently, not to sort of look at everything as a toy in their hands. So I don't know about the no scruples thing, but he and I gather there were about 4 other people who were huge newspaper owners on his scale who also treated their papers more or less as playthings. And I think this is where the word press baron actually comes from, because at least 2 of the 4 did indeed have titles, and one of them was a baron. And so it was literal. It was not just, somebody thought the word baron sort of was a good representation of these people, like a lumber baron. I mean, they were literally titled people. So I found that interesting. Anyway, so Winston Churchill is part of this circle. And the funny thing about that is Dmitri developed a real antipathy to Churchill. He'd met him earlier on in 1920 when he was having a sort of affair with Consuelo Vanderbilt, who had married Churchill's cousin, I believe, the Duke of Marlborough. Was it Marlborough? Probably getting that wrong. And yeah, he'd wanted to talk seriously with Churchill. Churchill was pro white Russian and actually wanted to intervene in Russia at that time on the side of the monarchists. And Dmitri, not surprisingly, wanted to talk to him about all that, and Churchill just gave him the brush off. So that was strike 1. And I don't know what ended up amounting to strikes 2 and 3, but when we return to Dmitri's Shotshelf diaries, you will see that he just has great antipathy for this man. I mean, he's an Anglophile. He wants England to do well. I mean, he had really a love-hate relationship with England, but a big part of the hate part was Churchill. So he was pretty unhappy when Churchill became prime minister. Anyway, we will talk about that later. So the man who was actually at that time the First Lord of the Admiralty was the 7th Earl Stanhope, James Stanhope, 7th Earl Stanhope. And I don't know much about him. I just, took a quick look so that I could give you a name, and I saw that there were various other, as I said, various other important civilian naval figures and actual military naval figures who apparently would be included under this umbrella term that Beaverbrook is using, although I don't know why Navy in particular. So this really, I can believe Grunwald that this turned Dmitri's head. As smart as he was, and should have been able to see through things, and should have been able to, in light of what had happened in Berlin, for instance, to realize that he needed to be careful. But, yeah, it would turn anybody's head, wouldn't it? Especially someone who had just longed for such a role. And now it seemed to be handed to him on a silver platter. And, I guess, I don't know how much of the case it was that he was a hanger-on with Beaverbrook and how much of a case it was that his opinion was really listened to. But he has this idea, according to Grunwald, that he's an important political figure now, and that may be one of the reasons why he underwent this evolution from a Russian nationalist into what, in his own words, he calls a patriot of Europe. This may have been sort of the beginning of that, distancing himself from young Russia and, through no fault of his own, becoming alienated from Vladimir. And, yeah, thinking of himself now as a big shot within world politics and not within the sort of little niche of Russian emigre politics. Really interesting, especially at the very end when he says that, when Grunwald says that Maisky represents a danger. That fascinated me, and I'm really glad I read the Wikipedia article, whatever you may think of Wikipedia, because it does talk about Beaverbrook. Beaverbrook, unlike Churchill, was anti-Russian. He was anti-White Russian, he was anti-Russian, at least in the sense that he didn't think Britain should have anything to do with Russia. But, according to Wikipedia, and I quote, Beaverbrook maintained good relations with Ivan Maisky, the Soviet ambassador in London, writing to him in 1936 about his, and here is in quoting Beaverbrook, friendly attitude towards your great leader, end quote. And he was, quoting again, determined that nothing shall be said or done by any newspaper controlled by me which is likely to disturb your tenure in office, end quote. Beaverbrook concluded, quoting again, while I am free and my newspapers in the attitude I take to the Russian leader, I must say I admire and praise his conduct of government. Wow, so he's talking about Stalin, of course. And this is kind of contradictory because Dmitri, in becoming a patriot of Europe, would turn against Stalin, whom he'd actually praised at one point back in 1936. So, we're getting some mixed signals here about where Dmitri stood. He definitely was anti-war from, he shared that or got that from Beaverbrook. And early in the letter, Grunwald had told us that Dmitri was quite disturbed about how people were throwing roses at his feet and courting him in Britain because they were so anxious to have this alliance against the Nazis with Soviet Russia, and that Dmitri was horrified by that. And here we find out that Dmitri's friend and infatuation is in fact very complimentary to Stalin and very in with Ivan Maisky, and one of the people who's enthusiastic about Maisky. And so at the end of this, is Grunwald talking about Dmitri when he says that there was talk of possible meetings with Maisky, the need to return to Moscow one day soon, and other projects of the same order? I think he's talking about Dmitri because he says, just previous to that, the Grand Duke talked to me about Beaverbrook so much during his last visit to Paris that it made me worry. especially when I learned that there was talk of possible meetings with Maisky, the need to return to Moscow one day soon, and other projects of the same order. So, wow, that's a biggie. Dmitri was actually, apparently, thinking of going back to Russia, possibly to in this idea of himself as a sort of grand political figure, maybe he thought he could have some influence there. So we all know how that would have turned out. I think it was possible that he would have survived it because his friend and former colleague Kazembek survived it. Kazembek went back after the war, and he outlived Stalin and had a peaceful existence, although I think he certainly lived to regret the decision to go back to the Soviet Union. So if we can take it from this that Dmitri was actually considering that, wow, good thing that didn't go any further, though it sure as heck would have been interesting. Okay, so what do we have next time? We have a personal meeting. When we return to 1939, a personal meeting of between Grunwald and Beaverbrook. So Beaverbrook takes Dmitri's suggestion and does what he himself is terribly anxious to do because he feels like he needs to babysit Dmitri. He goes to have a talk to Lord Beaverbrook, just like a parent might go to have a talk with, say, if your 10-year-old has a friend with a teenage is friends with a teenager who you think might be a bad influence. So he goes to check that out. And that is absolutely fascinating. It is when he's sort of at Beaverbrook's house, he finds it to be this kind of weird, almost a combination between Hollywood and Shakespeare. And so even though Dmitri directly doesn't come into it, you'll definitely want to hear that one. It's fascinating. And when in the next video, when we're in 1915, we have Dmitri's vendetta against crows that you might remember from when he was an adolescent. And in that respect, he's the polar opposite of me because I feed my crows every day, and they're quite tame, and I've got a mated pair at the moment, and I really enjoy them. I mean, they're wild. They'll let me get pretty close to them, and so I have anything but a vendetta against crows. Maybe I am somehow atoning for Dmitri's sins against crows. Anyway, and he'll be stuck inside by a blizzard, so we'll see how he deals with that. So definitely, yeah, come back. I'll see you next time. Bye.